Warning! Get on the ground, now!
I am on my own property. Articulate the crime, officer, right now.
You're refusing lawful orders!
There is no lawful order without reasonable suspicion. Put the weapon away.
Turn around! You're under arrest!
I am not resisting. This is an unlawful arrest on my curtilage.
The young officer whose name tag read Miller didn't care about the Constitution. He cared about authority. And he didn't like the tone of the woman standing above him. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't screaming. She was speaking with the icy, terrifying calm of a woman who had spent 30 years destroying arguments in federal courtrooms. But Officer Miller didn't know that. He didn't know that the woman in the gardening hat and cardigan was Eleanor Vance. He didn't know she was the section chief for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. He didn't know that she had personally overseen the consent decrees of 3 major police departments in the last decade. All he saw was a 58-year-old black woman in an upscale neighborhood where he believed she didn't belong, refusing to do what she was told. "Last warning," Miller shouted, his hand dropping to the taser on his belt. "Get on the ground." "I am not getting on the ground. I am standing on my curtilage. You have no jurisdiction to order me about on my own private property without reasonable suspicion of a crime. Articulate the crime, officer. Right now. Articulate it." Before we watch this situation spiral into an absolute legal nightmare for this department, I need you to do something. Stop what you're doing and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, your city, your state. And if you believe that a person's home is their castle and that police overreach needs to be stopped, hit that subscribe button right now. You are not going to believe the level of arrogance you are about to witness. This story is going to make your blood boil, but you need to see how it ends. Eleanor Vance had worked hard for this piece. She handled the toughest prosecution cases in Washington, D.C. She dealt with hate crimes, systemic corruption, and human trafficking. Her weekends in this quiet, leafy suburb were her sanctuary. She had lived in the colonial-style house for 12 years. Her neighbors knew her. The mailman knew her. But Officer Kyle Miller, 28 years old and transferred to this precinct only 3 months ago, did not know her. And he wasn't interested in learning. He was interested in domination. The dispatch call had been vague, a suspicious person report from a neighbor 2 streets over who claimed to see someone lurking on porches. That was it. No description of a crime, no broken windows, just a bias-based call about a person looking out of place. Miller had driven down the street, seen Eleanor standing on her porch examining a hanging fern, and decided she was the suspect. "You're under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct," Miller yelled, unholstering his taser and pointing it directly at her chest. Eleanor didn't flinch. She looked down at the red laser dot on her cardigan. She looked back up at Miller. "You are pointing a less lethal weapon at a senior federal official on her own property. You have qualified immunity only insofar as your actions are reasonable. This is not reasonable. Put that weapon away before you commit a felony." To understand the gravity of what was happening, we have to rewind just 20 minutes. It was a perfect Saturday morning, the kind of morning people work 40 years to enjoy. Eleanor had woken up early, made a pot of French press coffee, and put on her old gardening clothes, a comfortable pair of linen slacks, and a loose sweater. She had been pruning the hydrangeas. She had waved to Mr. Henderson across the street as he walked his golden retriever. It was the definition of suburban tranquility. She had just walked up the steps to sit on her porch swing and check her emails from the Attorney General's office when the cruiser screeched to a halt in front of her driveway. Now that peace was shattered. "I need to see some ID," Miller barked, stepping onto the first step of her walkway. "You need to prove you live here." "I don't need to prove anything to you," Eleanor said, her voice projecting clearly. She knew the law better than she knew her own children's birthdays. "This is a consensual encounter until you establish reasonable suspicion. You cannot demand identification from a citizen on their private property without specific articulable facts that a crime has occurred, is occurring, or is about to occur." Hybel v. 6th Judicial District Court of Nevada. Look it up. Miller paused. He clearly hadn't expected a case citation, but his ego was already too involved to back down. He felt the eyes of the neighborhood on him. A car slowed down as it passed. A woman across the street had stopped raking leaves. "We had a report of a suspicious person trying to break into homes," Miller lied. He was exaggerating the dispatch call to justify his aggression. "You fit the description." "What description?" Eleanor asked. "Did the caller describe a 58-year-old woman in gardening clogs pruning hydrangeas? Or did they just say black person? Because if you are detaining me based on a generalized description without corroborating behavior, you are engaging in racial profiling. That is a violation of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause." "Stop with the lawyer talk," Miller snapped. He took another step up the walkway. "You're resisting an investigation. That's a crime." "Exercising my rights is not resistance. It is citizenship," Eleanor retorted. She remained seated on the swing, her coffee mug still in her hand. "I am telling you for the last time, leave my property. You are not welcome here. You are trespassing." Miller's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his uniform. He was used to fear. He was used to people pleading, crying, or running. He didn't know what to do with a woman who looked at him like he was a misbehaving toddler. "I'm not leaving until I identify you," Miller said, crossing the invisible line of the curtilage, the area immediately surrounding the home that enjoys the same privacy protections as the house itself. "You just crossed the legal threshold," Eleanor said, pulling her phone from her pocket. She didn't call 911. She opened the camera app. "I am placing you on notice. You are violating clearly established law. There is no emergency here. There is no hot pursuit. You have no warrant. If you touch me, you will be facing a Title 18 Section 242 investigation for deprivation of rights under color of law." Miller froze for a second. The specific code citation rattled him. But then he looked across the street. A neighbor, a young man named David, had come out and was filming with his phone. Miller felt he had to win. He couldn't let a suspect lecture him in public. "Put the phone down," Miller ordered. "No," Eleanor said. "I have a First Amendment right to record public officials in the course of their duties. You are 0 for 3 on the Constitution, officer. Do you want to go for 4? The air in the neighborhood seemed to stand still. The birds had stopped singing, replaced by the crackle of Miller's police radio and the heavy breathing of a man who was in way over his head. Officer Miller made a choice. It was the decision that would define the rest of his life. He decided that his authority was more important than the law. He convinced himself that she was bluffing. She was probably just some squatter or a housekeeper with an attitude who had watched too many episodes of Law and Order. There was no way this woman was actually important. Important people didn't wear muddy gardening shoes. "That's it," Miller gritted out. "You're under arrest." He holstered his taser and stormed up the porch stairs. The wood creaked under his heavy boots. "I am not resisting," Eleanor stated loudly. Her voice directed not at Miller, but at the neighbor David, who was filming from the sidewalk. "I am passively complying with an unlawful order to avoid physical injury. Witness that I am offering no physical resistance." Miller grabbed her arm roughly, jerking her up from the swing. The coffee mug in her other hand tilted, spilling hot liquid onto the porch floorboards. "Turn around." Miller shoved her toward the porch railing. "I am turning," Eleanor said calmly. "You are using excessive force on a compliant subject. That is a Fourth Amendment seizure violation." Miller grabbed her wrists and twisted them behind her back. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click-click echoed off the siding of the house. It was a sound that usually signaled the end of a suspect's freedom. For Eleanor Vance, it signaled the beginning of a crusade. "You are hurting my shoulder," Eleanor said, her face pressed against the white column of her own porch. "I have a previous rotator cuff injury. I am informing you of this medical condition now. If you continue to hyperextend my arm, you are liable for damages." "Stop talking," Miller panted. He was sweating now. He double-locked the cuffs, squeezing them tighter than necessary. "You're done. You can tell it to the judge." "Oh, I certainly will," Eleanor whispered. "I'll tell it to the chief judge. I'll tell it to the Internal Affairs Bureau. I'll tell it to the federal grand jury." Miller dragged her down the stairs. Eleanor stumbled slightly but regained her footing. She walked with her head high. She didn't look at the ground. She looked straight at David, the neighbor filming. "David," she called out clearly, "please email that video to my work address. Use the DOJ server." Miller stopped. "Who are you talking to?" "My witness," Eleanor said. Miller shoved her toward the back of his patrol car. He opened the door and pushed her inside. The back of the cruiser was cramped, smelling of stale sweat and vinyl cleaner. It was a humiliation designed to break people. Eleanor Vance sat awkwardly, her hands pinned behind her back, her shoulder throbbing. But her mind was crystal clear. She began to memorize the timeline. 10:14 a.m. Officer arrival. 10:17 a.m. Trespass on curtilage. 10:19 a.m. Unlawful arrest. Miller got into the front seat. He adjusted his mirror to look at her. He expected to see tears. He expected begging. "If you had just shown me your ID, none of this would have happened," he said, trying to justify his actions to himself. Eleanor met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Officer, if you had known the law, you wouldn't be about to lose your pension." Miller laughed nervously. He put the car in drive and pulled away from the house, leaving the spilled coffee drying on the porch of the woman who was about to dismantle his entire department. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. It was 15 minutes of silence. Miller turned on the radio, trying to drown out the gnawing feeling in his gut. He was running the scenario over in his head, coming up with the language he would use in his report. Subject was belligerent, refused lawful orders, appeared to be under the influence, fear for officer safety. The standard buzzwords bad cops use to cover their tracks. Eleanor sat in the back, closing her eyes. She wasn't sleeping. She was composing the opening paragraph of her civil rights complaint. She was drafting the subpoena list. She was thinking about the Monell claim, the legal doctrine that would allow her to sue the city itself for failing to train this officer properly. They pulled into the sally port of the precinct. The garage door rumbled shut behind them, sealing them in the concrete belly of the station. Miller got out and opened the back door. "Let's go," he said. He grabbed her arm again, parading her through the intake area. Other officers looked up. They saw a woman who looked like their mothers or their aunts, dressed in nice clothes, handcuffed. A few eyebrows went up. Arresting a senior citizen from the wealthy district for disorderly conduct wasn't exactly the collar of the month. Miller brought her to the booking desk. Sergeant Thomas Kowalski was on duty. Kowalski was 56 years old, a veteran who had seen it all. He was 2 years from retirement and just wanted a quiet shift. He looked over the high counter at Miller, then at Eleanor. "What do we have here, Miller?" Kowalski asked, his tone bored. "Refusal to identify trespassing, disorderly resisting," Miller rattled off. "Found her on a porch over on Elm Street. Neighbors called in a suspicious person." Kowalski looked at Eleanor. He looked at her manicured hands, her expensive haircut, the way she stood, not slumped but waiting. "Ma'am, were you trespassing?" Kowalski asked. "I was drinking coffee at my own home, Sergeant," Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, authoritative. "Officer Miller decided that a black woman in zip code 20854 must be a criminal." Miller slammed his hand on the counter. "She refused to show ID. She was belligerent." "I asserted my Fourth Amendment rights," Eleanor corrected. "And now I would like my handcuffs removed. They are cutting off circulation." Kowalski sighed. "Uncuff her, Miller. We're in a secure facility." Miller hesitated, then undid the cuffs. Eleanor brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists. There were deep red indentations. She looked at them, then held them up for the camera in the corner of the room. "Empty your pockets, please," Kowalski said. "Standard procedure." Eleanor reached into her slacks. She pulled out her keys. Then she pulled out a slim leather wallet. She placed it on the counter. "My identification is in the center slot," she said. Kowalski picked up the wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a driver's license. Eleanor Vance, 412 Elm Street. "Miller," Kowalski said slowly, looking at the license and then at the officer. "This is her house. The address matches." Well, she didn't show it to me," Miller stammered. "Keep looking, Sergeant," Eleanor said softly. "Behind the license." Kowalski flipped the flap. He froze. There behind a protective plastic sheet was a federal credential. It featured the Department of Justice seal. It said, United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Below that, it said Section Chief. And below that, a card with a gold stripe that read, U.S. Attorney General's Office, Priority Access. Kowalski stared at the badge. He looked at the photo. He looked at Eleanor. The color drained out of his face so fast he looked like he was about to faint. He knew what the Civil Rights Division did. They were the ones who came in and tore corrupt police departments apart. They were the feds that every cop had nightmares about. And this rookie had just dragged one of their bosses in handcuffs for gardening. The silence in the booking room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Officer Miller, sensing the shift in atmosphere, leaned over to look at the wallet. "What is it?" Miller asked. Kowalski closed the wallet slowly, treating it like it was made of radioactive glass. He looked at Miller with a mixture of pity and rage. "You idiot," Kowalski whispered. "You absolute moron." "What?" Miller stepped back. Kowalski walked around the desk. He didn't look at Miller. He walked straight to Eleanor. "Ms. Vance, ma'am, I am Sergeant Kowalski. I need to apologize immediately. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Sergeant," Eleanor said, her voice hard as steel. "It was a false arrest based on racial profiling and a gross ignorance of the law. Is the watch commander in?" "Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Henderson is in his office." "Get him, now." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Kowalski turned to Miller. "Go sit in the break room. Don't speak to anyone. Don't touch your body camera. Don't write anything. Just sit there and pray." Miller, looking confused and suddenly very small, walked away. Kowalski picked up the phone and dialed an extension. "Lieutenant, you need to come down here, immediately." "No, sir. It's a situation, with a capital S." 2 minutes later, Lieutenant Henderson burst through the double doors. He was a man who prided himself on keeping a tight ship. He saw Eleanor standing by the booking desk, rubbing her wrists. He saw his sergeant looking pale. "Ms. Vance?" Henderson asked, approaching her with his hands out, palms up. "I'm Lieutenant Henderson. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. We can get you a ride home right now. We'll expunge the arrest record immediately. Just a rookie making a mistake." Eleanor looked at him. She didn't smile. She didn't accept the handshake. "Lieutenant, you are not going to expunge anything yet," she said. "You are going to process this arrest. You are going to generate a booking number. You are going to take my mugshot." Henderson blinked. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. We want to let you go. No charges." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "You want to bury this. You want to make it go away so there is no paper trail. But that's not how the law works. Your officer arrested me. He deprived me of my liberty. If you fail to document that you are falsifying records, I want everything documented. I want the body camera footage downloaded and preserved with a chain of custody log. I want the dispatch logs. I want the name of the caller." She stepped closer to the lieutenant. She was 5'4", but she towered over him. "You see, Lieutenant, I'm not just a victim today. I am the evidence, and I am going to make sure that every single second of this encounter is preserved for the federal lawsuit I am filing on Monday morning. Now fingerprint me." Henderson looked at Kowalski. There was no way out. They couldn't refuse to process someone they had arrested. That would be another policy violation. "Process her," Henderson said, his voice defeating. "And someone get me the chief on the phone, on a Saturday." Eleanor Vance left the station 40 minutes later. She walked out the front door holding her release papers. She didn't take the ride from the police. She called her husband, a retired surgeon, who picked her up in their sedan. He was furious, but Eleanor was calm. She was in work mode. As soon as she got home, back to the porch where it all started, she sat down at her computer. She didn't even change out of her gardening clothes. She sent 3 emails. The first was to the United States Attorney for the district. The second was to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. The third was to the best civil rights litigator in private practice in the state, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who Eleanor had mentored years ago. By Monday morning, the precinct was under siege. The lawsuit, Vance v. Miller and the city, was filed at 9:00 a.m. sharp. It was a masterpiece of legal writing. It didn't just claim emotional distress. It laid out a pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing. Eleanor had used her connections to pull the data. It turned out Officer Miller had a habit. In his 3 months, he had stopped black motorists and pedestrians at a rate 4 times higher than his peers. He had 5 complaints for rudeness that had been dismissed by Lieutenant Henderson. The suspicious person caller was identified as Mrs. Gable, a notorious neighborhood busybody who had called the police on delivery drivers, meter readers, and kids selling lemonade. The police knew she was a nuisance caller, yet Miller had treated her vague, biased report as gospel truth without verifying a single fact. The internal affairs investigation wasn't optional this time. With the DOJ looking over their shoulder, the department had to bring in outside investigators. They interviewed the neighbors. David, the young man who filmed the arrest, provided the video. The video went viral, of course. Not because Eleanor posted it, she didn't need to, but because it was public record in the court filing. The sight of Officer Miller twisting the arm of a 58-year-old woman on her own porch while she calmly cited Supreme Court cases became the most shared clip on the internet. Commenters were stunned. "She schooled him," one wrote. "He picked the wrong one," said another. But for Eleanor, it wasn't about internet fame. It was about the principle. The city attorney took one look at the video, then one look at Eleanor's resume, and told the mayor, "Write the check." There was no defense. None. Miller had violated clearly established law. He had no qualified immunity. But Eleanor refused the first settlement offer, and the second. "I don't want a non-disclosure agreement," she told the city's lawyers during a deposition. "I want a consent decree." She wanted systemic change. She demanded that the department rewrite its policies on suspicious person calls. She demanded mandatory training on the Fourth Amendment and implicit bias led by outside experts. She demanded that officer disciplinary records be made more transparent. And she demanded Officer Miller's badge. 6 months later, the results came in. The investigation sustained all charges against Officer Kyle Miller. Unlawful arrest, excessive force, biased policing, and conduct unbecoming. He was terminated. Because of the severity of the civil rights violation, the state licensing board revoked his certification. He would never be a police officer again. The city settled the lawsuit for $1.2 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a single arrest in the state's history. Eleanor didn't keep a dime. She created the Vance Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal representation for homeowners who had been harassed by police in their own neighborhoods. The police chief was forced into early retirement. Lieutenant Henderson was demoted for failing to supervise his rookie officers. The department was placed under a monitoring agreement requiring them to report stop and frisk data to the state for the next 5 years. It was a Tuesday afternoon, almost a year later. The weather was turning crisp, the leaves changing color. Eleanor Vance sat on her porch swing. The hydrangeas were blooming beautifully. She held a cup of coffee in her hand, the same mug she had held that day. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street. It was a new officer, a young woman. As she passed Eleanor's house, she slowed down. She didn't stop to harass. She gave a respectful nod, a wave of acknowledgement, and kept driving. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. The neighborhood was quiet. The birds were singing. She had won, but she knew the fight wasn't over. She knew that for every Eleanor Vance with a law degree and federal credentials, there were thousands of people who didn't know the words curtilage or reasonable suspicion. There were thousands who got cuffed and took the plea deal because they were scared. She had fought for them. She had used her power, her privilege, and her pain to carve out a little more space for justice in this world. Justice isn't just about punishing the bad guys. It's about protecting the peace of the innocent. It's about the right to sit on your own porch in your own home and breathe free air without fear. Officer Miller had tried to take her dignity. Instead, he had given her a platform. He tried to order her off her porch, but he ended up proving why she and everyone else had the right to stay right there. What do you think was the punishment for Officer Miller enough? Or should he have faced criminal charges for what he did? And what would you do if an officer ordered you off your own property? Drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If this story moved you, please share it. We need to look out for each other. Until next time, stay safe. Know your rights and never let anyone push you off your porch.